So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Kashtira and asking the simple question of, are the Kashtira cards even good? Like straight up? I think to an extent, you could argue like that the archetype itself was ruined by like two things. Probably number one, we have, I guess, Arisehar, arguably. And then the second card is going to be, Diablo. Wait, was that not the name of this card? Yeah, there we go. Diablosis, the Mind Hacker. And the direction Kashtira kind of went. But yeah, let's go over what the Kashtira cards actually do. So let's count up these interruptions in a bit. But essentially, in an ideal world, let's just say we start with Rates Off, okay? Rates Off grabs you Kashtira Unicorn. Unicorn can then, since we have Theosis, I guess, we can Theosis. And then what targets do we have for Theosis? Well, technically, you can summon any of these guys, and that will net you at least a Shangri-Ira. Now, what does Shangri-Ira allow you to do? You can special summon one of any Kashtira monster from your deck. So that means you can essentially just use their trigger effect. So in that case, you can summon another Unicorn, you can summon a Fenrir, you can summon an Ogre. So if we were to just do this, it allows us to, behold, we can lock down one zone. That's right. When our opponent activates one card effect, specifically it has to be a monster effect, we might, actually, yeah, we'll change it to might be able to lock down a single zone with Shangri-Ira. Yeah, I know, right? Glorious. So when I mean might, it's that Kashtira Fenrir, like Unicorn probably will resolve, and also Ogre, right? But Fenrir, if it doesn't banish anything, then it does nothing. So let's say, for example, our opponent, I don't know, let's say they normal summon, let's say Aluber, I guess. We attempt to banish Aluber with Fenrir, and then all of a sudden our opponent activates like Linkage, I guess. Don't worry about what our opponent's playing, but they linkage off the Aluber, and therefore it is not banished face down. And then Fenrir banishes nothing. Shangri-Ira does not trigger. You do not lock down any zones. But let's say they don't have linkage, and we lock down either a monster zone or a spell trap zone. What difference does that make? It absolutely does nothing. Great. So now let's backpedal and let's go back to the combo. So if we Theosis here, the best target in theory, arguably, it's either going to be Fenrir or Ogre. So if we go Ogre, we have the idea of grabbing Big Bang. So that this is like, in theory, you can then go like Ogre effect, Shangri-Ira effect, you can lock down two zones, and now you can banish one monster that your opponent controls, but actually you don't choose, they choose which monsters they banish. And also they know you have Big Bang because they just saw you search it. So yeah, that's kind of terrible, isn't it? So either way, I mean, the only form of removal or interaction that really matters is going to be Fenrir here. If your opponent is not playing just random one-ofs in their extra deck, then Unicorn, even if it banishes like 2 times, it can end up amounting to like nothing. If we have like a Kashtira Ogre, in theory, like let's say our opponent's playing Blue Eyes White Dragon, you're not banishing all of your opponent's like 2 to 3 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon unless you would banish one, so that they'll still have one to do everything they need with, basically. I don't think many decks play like one super important, insane, like Garnet, or have a one-of that they absolutely need in the deck to be able to play. Well, with a few exceptions. Like, for example, with Tenpai, if you bash Chundra, they're completely and utterly cooked because that deck just got hit with limits. But aside from that, exactly, yeah, Ogre does not really pop off. So Unicorn, arguably, that doesn't really stop your opponent from doing anything either. It's just like situational. It depends on like what they have in their extra deck exactly. The only thing that consistently has impact is kind of Fenrir, but only kind of. Because at the same time, yeah, you do need your opponent to actually activate a monster effect. So until they do that, your Fenrir is actually just sitting pretty. So in theory, uh, let's say my opponent activates, I don't know, like Rhoda, Upstart, Chicken Game. You can lose to Exodia. Like, no joke, just draw power Exodia. Like, let's assume by some miracle, if you remove one of the chicken games from the field, like you win the game or something, like just any form of interaction, you just can't activate or do anything with any of these Kashtira cards. Like, yeah, they just do absolutely nothing. Well, in some circumstances, right? And even if you did lock 2 zones, right, there aren't that many decks that need like 5 monster zones going second. I think 3 is pretty sufficient, right? So whenever this deck just came out, right, like if we focus on the actual Kashtira cards, they're kind of mid. Like straight up, Kashtira was better when you were just not playing Kashtira. Like for example, when you're playing Fenrir and Pearly, it was better than Fenrir in actual Kashtira. Like you would do like, yeah. Speaking of Fenrir, actually, Fenrir doesn't even do anything really. Like it still doesn't really do anything, even if you take into account like a Rise Art existing. Like right, as a Kashtira player, all you can do with Fenrir is you search like Unicorn, a copy of itself, or Rise Art. These are like the 3 that you would search, assuming you started with only a single copy of Fenrir, right? So no Theosis, no Birth, just Fenrir. That's it. All you can do, really. In theory, I guess the best thing you can do is like Rise Heart. You grab Rise Heart. Rise Heart banishes Birth. Next turn, you grab a second Rise Heart, and then you can banish a Theosis to grab back the Birth, and then you can use all of your Rise Hearts plus the 1 Fenrir to then make a Rise Heart, which honestly, arguably, if your opponent's okay under macro, this card is objectively kind of terrible. Because it's just, well, it becomes a little bit better because it technically banishes any 1 card face down. But if you look at this from a different perspective, so assuming it doesn't matter, like how you remove their cards and all that, this card is literally just the Raigeki break. But like, yeah, that's depressing when you look at it that way, right? But a lot of decks, to the advantage of this card, I guess, they're just not good under macro, so you have an advantage there. Like Malice, surprisingly, they're actually worse under macro because you can't like make Splash Mage or Transcode Talker or anything like that. And also, it turns off forever a one of the Malice cards, the one that special summons itself from hand, kind of. Well, I mean, technically they can banish a Malice card from their hand, I believe, to special summon that thing, but you much prefer to banish a card in your graveyard, which no longer exists because a Rise Art. So, what does this whole deck really amount to? Like when you set up your interactions, it's basically just you have 2 forms of removal. And of course, this doesn't like really consider the fact that your opponent actually plays cards too, so they can drop hand traps, board breakers. They have engine as well, all of which Kashtira is arguably not super good against. Like it depends on exactly what your opponent's on, I suppose, but yeah. The only thing that this deck actually had going for it is probably just Diablosis, really. After you take away Diablosis, this deck just like is not even close to what it would be with Diablosis. So with like Kashtira Ogre, right? If you just banished, like even in combination with Rise Art, you're just banishing like 3 random cards from your opponent's deck face down. It doesn't really matter too much. Ogre, you dig through 5 and then you banish 1, but like The only way that would be impactful is, well, since this banish is face down, you'd have to banish 2 of your opponent's like key card, so some sort of key card. So let's say our opponent has 3 branded fusion that they might need for combo or something, so old branded, I guess. You banish 2 copies of branded fusion with Rise Heart, and you magically know that you did. Kashtira Ogre, well, considering it banishes face down, right? So Kashtira Ogre then, it needs to wait for your opponent to activate a monster effect, and then you need to look at their top 5, and among those top 5 must be the 3rd branded fusion, which you will then probably banish, and then maybe it's like GG skis. But with Diablosis, this banishes like half of your opponent's deck, just straight up. Half of it gone, banish face down. So how many cards does this banish exactly? So that'd be 3 get banished from Rise Heart, and then you banish a 4th card with Diablosis, so that's like 8 cards from that. And then if we were to activate any Kashtira card that banishes, but I mean preferably at this point we'll say Kashtira Ogre, they'll banish the 9th card, and then it banishes twice that amount. So he'll banish 18 cards from your opponent's deck, all face down. And you have 35 cards bashing like half of essentially your opponent's main deck. In theory, it could banish a little bit higher, but yeah, it banishes like half of your opponent's main deck, and yeah, that's absolutely brutal. But also RNG at the same time, because if you just didn't banish all of the relevant cards, right, or enough of the relevant cards, then this effect also ends up essentially doing nothing. But most of the time, it's pretty good, right? Because you're banishing most, if not like pretty much the entirety of your opponent's like main deck. Pretty much we can consider being all of their main deck actually, because in theory you could also activate, like if you really want to, well, with certain hands you might be able to activate like Tier Cash twice, allowing for you to send an additional 6 cards. So that would be 24 cards out of your opponent's 35. Technically, if you want to, considering you're going first, they draw 1 card, then they have 10 cards left in their main deck, in theory, after you've resolved like Diablosis plus Tier Cash twice, which is fairly reasonable-ish to do, honestly. So if you did manage that, I mean, it's not that great, it's not that bad, but yeah, there's also, I guess, kind of been forgetting about this, but Raytoth actually has like pop attached to it. But at the same time, you know, like if they drop something and you want Fenrir banish that like pretty much immediately, then you know that they'll end up on an empty field, so you have nothing to pop with the Raytoth. And you know, essentially for Raytoth to activate, like with the exception of if you have something like an Arise Heart, then your Raytoth doesn't actually have a really good activation window, because your opponent controls the activation window on this. So yeah, that card royally sucks. Arise Heart, what do you have with Arise Heart? Let's see. I guess it allows for a little bit better pop timing for Raytoth. That might be it, really. No, nothing else to really say about this, huh? So yeah, I mean, bashing like half of your opponent's main deck, that's something. Arise Heart is just like macro, essentially, because of the Raigeki break. I mean, that fact is only relevant because specifically, if you were to make a 3 material Rise Heart and pass, this prevents your opponent from specifically like just going into some sort of XYZ and setting up a Zeus and immediately Zeusing the board, because you can't respond. Like, also worth mentioning, I guess, is that any deck, like Zodiac in general, like with any Zodiac normal summon, can just break a Kashtira board by just attacking into an XYZ and then making Zeus, and then like you can't respond until the chain after Zeus responds with Kashtira. Like, The deck, but functionally, like, just pretty terrible. Like, the Kashtira cards are just, for some reason, always just all better in a non-Kashtira deck. With the exception of, like, Ogre. And only Ogre. Yeah. Kashtira for you, I guess. With Diablosis combined with, like, Unicorn, I guess this is more impactful, being able to banish, like, somewhat reasonably-ish 3 cards from your opponent's, like, extra deck. So, you know, special summon Unicorn, if you Ash or whatever, a card, and we still have Extender. So this really requires a really good hand to do this. But yeah, I mean, Diablosis effect as well, combined with this. We're banishing a couple cards. That's really it. Just banishing a couple of cards from your opponent. That's all this does from the extra deck. In theory, if like their extra deck didn't even matter, so like any craft, for example, like you had a new deck that came out recently. This deck actually just happens to ignore like everything Kashtira does. Like it just, funnily enough, like if you Ogre effect, doesn't matter. If you lock the Pendulum Zone, it only moderately matters. With like Shangri-La, I guess if you lock 2 of the Pendulum Zones, if you're able to do that, that would matter, and that's about it. But also at the same time, they can just special summon those guys instead, and then you can't really easily remove those guys because like depending on the face down, it's actually a problem. Like, they have targeting protection if you activate cards above chain length 3, a Torimar, Omni Negate, flip everything face down, like that can trigger. And then there's certain guys that trigger if you activate like monster effects in certain ways or something, and then that searches a card, which could be a Torimar. And yeah, that's just in general just problems, and none of the cards will really care about like the macro, so they're like moderately okay under macro. The only thing you want are the spells in the graveyard, and that's it, really. Even if your cards get banished face down, it doesn't really affect you that much. Well, I mean, you would prefer them in the extra deck slightly, but it's fine. You can, for the most part, ignore like all the Kashtira cards, really. And because your cards count as like spells or traps when you're activating like the Pent effects, they don't actually trigger like the Kashtira cards. Worth mentioning, I guess, right? So that's a thing. And then your recovery, it's like strong, but also not strong at the same time. Like, you have Kashtira Birth, which can like reborn stuff, right? And then you essentially do your combo all over again the next turn. But also, like, if they remove your birth, you kind of have nothing sometimes. Like sometimes Kashtira has like an insane amount of follow-up, and then other times it has absolutely nothing. It's just like flip-flops super hard depending on like game state. A lot more than certain other decks. Like, for example, let's say the yugioh stuff, you can pop like your Enchained monster, and then that grabs you like a starter for next turn, and you can relatively consistently do that. You can even pop your own cards to do that. So it's pretty solid in that regard. I guess if you combine like Diablosis plus Kashtira Shangri-La, you can lock down like an okay amount of zones. The zone lock mechanic, like if you manage the zone lock, then your opponent can't play. But at the same time, it's like so relatively like it is relatively difficult to actually perform the zone lock with like Shangri-La, that like you would have already, like, if you're able to zone lock, you could have done something else that would have also won you the game. So it's just kind of not worth to zone lock somewhat either. So yeah, in short, like Kashtira, the cards, like somehow, some way, these cards, I feel like they've mostly fallen off, and that's partially, I guess, why we have the Fenrir again. But with Kashtira Unicorn, like I think that this is probably the best Kashtira card you could just drop, is as the highest impact, being able to allow you to deal with a potential Zeus or Typhon if those matter to your deck. And then you also have the idea of just um well, being able to have more impact than Fenrir, because Fenrir is just not as consistently able to resolve as like a unicorn, I guess. Uh, the only thing Fenrir has up on Unicorn is probably its like going second ability. It is kind of moderately okay. So you can special summon like Fenrir, and then add another copy of Fenrir in theory, and then try to run over your opponent's sky by battle and also banish one of their cards. But I mean, if someone sees Fenrir just drop it, they can just quick effect remove this on the spot before you're able to activate Fenrir at all. So it's kind of like moderately bad in that case. If you just slap this additionally on your end board as like an extra interruption, it's not like that bad, but it's not like that super game changing either. I mean, it does depend on the exact list you're dealing with. Like, in theory, if your opponent had Cool Tune and the only thing they could do was normal summon Rekko and then activate Rekko effect and then attempt to go into like maybe a track maker or something, yeah, Fenrir would be great there, but at the same time, like anything would be good there. So yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that these cards, like essentially what they've amount to at the moment is they just turbo out Rysart in some way, shape, or form, and Rysart is just simply put a macrocosmos. But if you really think about it, you don't really have like that consistent of access into like Kashtira combo, and this stuff, like it's not always going to be like a one card. In terms of one cards, the only one cards you have for Kashtira combo is specifically these three cards, and you have semi-limited Unicorn, limited Great Saw. So you have 3 1 cards here in this deck, and you're running a bunch of like junk, arguably. So you're running like Big Bang. Kashtira Theosis is completely terrible if you have no Kashtira monster. Kashtira Birth, same kind of deal. And also, like, some of these cards don't pair well with certain Kashtiras. Like, for example, like, Tear Cash does not pair well with Theosis, like, at all. And Scareclaw Kashtira also doesn't pair well with Kashtira Theosis, because you have the idea of, let's say, I have, let's say it should be another spell trap, right? So if I have 2 copies of Kashtira Theosis plus 1 of Scareclaw Cash, I cannot summon Fenrir to add Rysart. I can only summon Unicorn, which in this case will probably just grab Birth for follow-up. And we can only end up making like Shangri-Ira and passing. Which Shangri-Ira pass is just objectively terrible, because then you only get 1 Kashtira monster effect for the next turn, and it does have like follow-up aspects, but if your opponent actually has cards like, do you think summoning a single Unicorn or Fenrir is and locking down 1 zone is going to make a difference? Like, yeah, it's not, right? So considering like the consistency issues that you have with Kashtira, like it'd be more consistent to just cut out like straight up every single Kashtira card, like as wild as this sounds, and then you just run like 3 copies of Macro, and then 3 copies of Chaos Distill. Let's see, right? Yeah. You could just run these cards. And this has, well, considering this is just literally just dropping the equivalent of Macro, right? This is 3 times, well, not exactly 3 times, but close to 3 times more efficient than Kashtira, and 3 times more consistent in dropping down macros. And this doesn't consider like dropping an extra deck macro. Arguably, like back row macro is better. But like hero combo that makes Darklaw, like that's like ridiculously consistent now, to the point where like honestly I wouldn't even mind a Darklaw ban. Like it's pretty obnoxious playing against hero, because that deck is just a floodgate deck. Really, it's just the glorified floodgate deck. Yep. But yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter that much. Like you could ban it, you could not ban it. It wouldn't matter that much. But same argument for Rysar, really, I suppose. But yeah, these cards are actually just more efficient, anyways, because you can't hand trap these. You just specifically need certain backer removal cards, and you just need to open them to deal with these cards. Yeah, just straight up, right? And this makes it now so that at the moment, like we actually have 9 copies of different cards that are all like macro, pretty much, because this allows you to search macro, yeah? So with 3 copies of essentially macro cosmos here, just or nine copies here that you can main deck pretty much. Well, if they release any deck that's just really good under macro for some reason, like that deck is just going to have a field day. And that deck is just not really Kashtira, because Kashtira just doesn't, like, it benefits off of macro, actually. This is one of the few decks that does. So specifically, your benefit is like your Kashtira preparations is actually usable. Is this card actually like when they released it in Master Duel, this card was literally not even usable. If we're just considering like the archetypal cards, because you have no way to banish your own cards. Like, as dumb as that sounds, like we didn't have Tear Cash or Scareclaw Cash. So the only way for you to actually banish your own cards, well, you had reasonably 2 ways, I'll say. So you have just card opening like a fissure or like a macro type card, or you can make the rank 7 dark dragon, the dark armed dragon guy, and then you can banish your Kashtira cards in the graveyard. Yep. That was the only way for you to trigger Kashtira preparations. Well, not trigger, but just meet the summoning conditions for Kashtira preparations pretty much. I guess there was also the idea of summoning from hand some cards if you add them with like Fenrir. And Rysar banishing monsters for you to special summon off of preparations. But yeah, these are just way worse than just having like a macro up just for preparations. So overall, like as a deck, like I think I unironically think this year is somewhere close to like a 7 out of 10 deck. Might be like a bit lower, like maybe even 6.9, 6.8. Not really going to focus too much on the exact rating, but yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would say that Kashtira has up on other decks at the time of its release, well, aside from being able to like run Shifter, like if we're just focusing on the archetype as a whole, it just had a better going second ability on average than like other decks, because you just have absolutely no way to really do anything going second with most engines at the time, or even like currently now. Well, you have more that do things like Cool Tune, Draco Tail. Those are somewhat useful. K9. Yeah, we've gone a lot recently. With Elf Note though, like you have the 1 turn 0 card, I guess, right? If we go back 1 year, I think that's when we really don't really have anything that helps with going second. And all of your cards are all of your engine cards, where most of those archetypes released in that year, should just be like setting up combo for themselves, right? I guess that'd be like your Malices and everything like in that vein, with no like real advantage or anything to play around if you're going second. You're just trying to essentially resolve your combo going second, and that just kind of describes how most decks kind of function here. But Kashtira's playstyle at least is a little bit more interesting in the sense that you're not just necessarily full comboing, or well, mostly because you have no combo whatsoever to speak of. Like the only thing you're thinking about is like, do I make Shangri-La or not? Like, because Arisar was not an option. So yeah, the deck with Arisar, it's like better overall, but like let's assume this deck was like tier 0 right now, right? It has like 90% player. This deck is a joke. It's so easy to beat. Like You can just put in any like going second cards, and if you draw any of them, you're solid. Like any going second cards, any board breakers, any hand traps, you're just solid. If you go first, then you just hit them with some removal, and you're fine for the most part. Like, in terms of like what we can do, like what would the best possible hand even be? So I think you don't want rates off because rates off can be removed by like things, and also like it can be ashed. So that's just worse. So the best hand you'd produce is like it consists of like some of these cards probably, and then maybe a fissure. That's like the best you can do probably. This nice to like just some removal though. One of the worst things that could happen is like assuming we have something like this. Like this hand's terrible, right? The only two cards that are like super worth summoning. I mean, if we actually cut Gear Cash, it's even worse, right? Because then the only two monsters you can put on field is like Rise Heart. Like even if you open Double Unicorn doesn't really do anything unless it's like something like special summon Unicorn, opponent activates Mirror Jade, special summon second Unicorn, and then you can resolve this effect to Surge. Aside from that, right? If this gets like impermed on summon, then you can just summon Rise Heart and then try to make Zeus. Maybe. But you can't even summon Fenrir later. You can't even summon it next turn. It's just awful, really. So yeah, I mean, when we're thinking about like playing, I guess Kashtira outside Kashtira, like you can see the gap, right? Because simply like even the Kashtira cards, they don't really synergize that well with each other, just straight up, and that's like a problem, right? So if we were to compare this, I guess with let's just take Cool Tune at the moment, right? If you open, I guess Q plus Recco, that's not like insanely good, but it's not unusable, right? So let's say normal summon either these two, it gets like impermed or something, you can still like synchro using the two of these to go into it's Loudness War, right? Is that the only target? Yeah, Loudness War. Okay, whatever. You go into Loudness War, these guys trigger the graveyard effects or whatever, and that's something. Now, meanwhile, what if I special summon Unicorn and I don't get to search with it? Then Fenrir just sits in hand kind of dead. Even if I do special summon like Riser after this, it's just making Shangri-Ira to summon one guy. It might even be like, in theory, just another Unicorn again. So it's just Unicorn plus Shangri-Ira, or like Fenrir plus Shangri-Ira, which is still not great. I mean, it is fine in the sense that like you're not like going insanely hard, so your inboard's like fairly reasonable, so your opponent has a shot. But you also have no follow-up after this, so let's assume they can't lethal. Maybe your Fenrir was relevant. If they remove like these two, then you have no follow-up play. Even though you essentially this was a two-card combo to go into Shangri-Ira to some extent. So yeah, I would definitely not put Kashtira as like a really good deck by any means. I think the best thing about Kashtira is probably that it's like fairly beginner friendly. I think that's about that's about all Kashtira has got for it. You know, it's like relatively simple to play. Kind of. Actually, wait, no, it's not. Yeah, I just remembered. Like the basic combo is kind of there, but then I just remembered if you have like Birth, like let's say you have Fenrir plus Birth, it actually gets kind of complicated to an extent. Or even if you have like Unicorn plus Birth, Unicorn plus Theosis is the same, but yeah, it gets a little bit complicated with like sequencing stuff. Do you make like a Rise Heart? Do you make like Shangri-Ira? Do you skip Shangri-Ira and don't make it at all? When do you activate like Big Bang? Do you like banish Tier Cash, maybe special summon this to mill your opponent's cards. You have that option, or you would banish like Kashtira Ogre to grab preparations, and then in some cases you would add Tier Cash in hand to banish one of your guys in graveyard, like in case they out Riser, you bash this again, and then special summon it with preparations on the next turn. So it gets a little bit complicated with the multi-card, but I mean, if you're just wanting to make Riser pass it, I guess that's not complicated. But like everything else does get a bit complicated. There's also like, if you want Big Bang, because you can search Big Bang in some cases, you can also do like Tier Cash, banish Theosis, adds Big Bang, and then you need to decide on like the targets you're bashing, what you're keeping. It's just a lot, honestly, when you start considering that stuff. And then like the follow-up aspects of like what you add with Theosis. Like, do I add Rysart? Do I add Tier Cash? Do I add Fenrir? And then how do I set up and facilitate their summons and whatnot in future turns? If you grab Rysart, you can like normal summon Rysart for follow-up later in theory, and then go like banish another Theosis to add a card. But then you control Rysart, meaning you can't special summon any Kashtira monster you added to the hand. If you have like a Birth banish, you could add that, and then that is actually kind of somewhat combo. So it's not even like that simple, but it's not like that complicated, I suppose. But wait, the Dark Arm Dragon, actually, because of the Theosis, that matters too. Yeah, whatever. That's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.